The morning Elena Blackwood walked into the Cherokee Cultural Center in Asheville, North Carolina, she had no idea her carefully constructed life was about to crumble. For 28 years, she had lived as a white woman, her olive skin explained. Away as Mediterranean heritage, her dark eyes attributed to her Italian grandmother. But as she stood face to face with Chief William Redhawk, his weathered hands reaching toward her face with an expression of recognition that made her blood run cold, she realized that some secrets are too powerful to stay buried forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Elena's morning routine was as precise as a Swiss watch. Every day at 6:30 a.m., she would apply her makeup with the skill of a professional artist, carefully selecting foundations and concealers that would lighten her natural complexion by 2 shades. The ritual had become so automatic that she could do it in the dark, each stroke of the brush designed to erase the truth written in her DNA. Living in Charlotte, North Carolina, Elena had built what appeared to be the perfect life. She worked as a marketing executive for a prestigious firm downtown, lived in a modern apartment in the trendy South End district, and dated Marcus Wellington, a real estate lawyer whose family tree could be traced back to the Mayflower. To everyone who knew her, Elena Blackwood was just another ambitious young professional climbing the corporate ladder in the New South. But Elena Blackwood wasn't even her real name. Elena Night Feather in a small town outside Cherokee, North Carolina. She had been raised by her Cherokee grandmother, Mary Night Feather, after her parents died in a car accident when she was 6 years old. Her grandmother had been a respected elder in their community, known for her knowledge of traditional medicines and her ability to speak both Cherokee and English fluently. The old woman had filled Elena's childhood with stories of their ancestors, teachings about the natural world, and lessons about what it meant to be Cherokee. Elena's transformation began the day she turned 18. Her grandmother had passed away the previous winter, and with no other family to speak of, Elena found herself completely alone. The small house where she had grown up felt like a tomb, filled with memories of a life she was increasingly desperate to escape. The reservation felt suffocating, a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where her mixed heritage made her feel like she belonged neither fully to the Cherokee world nor the white world that seemed to offer so many more opportunities. Decision to reinvent herself hadn't come overnight. It started small, with Elena lightening her hair and experimenting with makeup techniques she learned from YouTube videos. She began to notice how differently people treated her when she looked more conventionally white. Store clerks were friendlier, job interviews went better, and she found herself welcomed into social circles that had previously seemed closed to her. When she applied for college, Elena made the decision that would define the next decade of her life. She legally changed her name from Elena Night Feather to Elena Blackwood, choosing a surname that sounded distinguished but didn't carry the weight of her Cherokee heritage. On her college applications, she checked the box for white, under ethnicity, and when asked about her background, she spoke of Italian grandparents and Mediterranean roots. The transformation was remarkably successful. At the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Elena thrived. She joined a sorority, made friends easily, and found that her exotic looks, now explained as Italian heritage, actually worked in her favor. She was considered beautiful in an interesting way, with her high cheekbones and dark eyes setting her apart from the typical blonde sorority sisters without marking her as obviously non-white. But success came with a price that Elena hadn't fully anticipated. Every day became a performance, each interaction requiring careful monitoring to ensure she didn't slip up and reveal something that might give away her true background. She had to learn to suppress her knowledge of Cherokee customs, to pretend ignorance when conversations turned to Native American issues, and to laugh along when people made casual comments that cut deep into her heart. The most difficult part was learning to see her own people through the eyes of the white world. She had chosen to inhabit. When Native American issues came up in classes or conversations, Elena found herself nodding along with stereotypes and misconceptions that she knew were false. She watched documentaries about Cherokee history with her college friends, biting her tongue when they got basic facts wrong, forcing herself to remain silent when they discussed her people, as if they were a historical curiosity rather than a living, breathing community. After college, Elena moved to Charlotte and threw herself into building her career. She was ambitious and talented, and her success seemed to validate the choices she had made. Within 5 years, she had been promoted twice, and was making a salary that would have seemed impossible back on the reservation. She lived in a world of business lunches and cocktail parties, of weekend trips to the mountains and gallery openings in the arts district. It was at one of these gallery openings that she met Marcus Wellington. He was everything she thought she wanted in a partner: educated, successful, from a prominent family with deep roots in Charlotte society. Marcus was the kind of man who opened doors for her, literally and figuratively. Through him, she gained access to country club memberships and charity galas, to a social circle where her background was never questioned, because her presence was vouched for by someone whose family name carried weight. Their relationship progressed steadily and conventionally. They moved in together after a year, and Marcus began making noises about marriage and children. Elena found herself caught up in planning a future that looked nothing like the life she had once imagined for herself as a child on the reservation. She began to think about white weddings and suburban houses, about raising children who would never know their Cherokee heritage, about becoming fully and completely the person she had created. But even as Elena's external life became more successful and seemingly perfect, something inside her began to rebel. It started with small things. She would find herself craving foods from her childhood that her grandmother used to make, dishes that she couldn't easily find in Charlotte's restaurants. She would drive past Native American cultural centers and feel a sharp pang of longing that she couldn't quite explain to herself. The dreams were worse. Elena began having vivid dreams about her grandmother, about the mountains of western North Carolina, about ceremonies and traditions that she had thought she had successfully forgotten. She would wake up speaking Cherokee words that she hadn't used in years, her heart racing with a mixture of guilt and homesickness that she couldn't shake. These feelings intensified when Marcus began talking more seriously about marriage. He had started dropping hints about ring shopping and asking her opinions about wedding venues. His family had begun including her in family photos and referring to her as their future daughter-in-law. Elena should have been happy, but instead, she felt increasingly trapped. The crisis came on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Elena was at work, reviewing marketing campaigns for a new client, when her assistant knocked on her office door. There was a call for her, the assistant said, from someone claiming to be from the Cherokee Cultural Center. Elena's first instinct was to have the call transferred to voicemail, but something made her hesitate. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman named Sarah Climbing Bear, who introduced herself as a program coordinator at the Cherokee Cultural Center in Asheville. Sarah explained that they were putting together an exhibit about Cherokee families who had been displaced or separated from their communities, and Elena's name had come up in their research. Elena's heart began to race. How had they found her? What did they know? She tried to keep her voice steady as she told Sarah that she thought there might be some mistake, that she wasn't Cherokee and had no connection to any Cherokee families. Sarah was persistent but gentle. She mentioned Elena's grandmother, Mary Nightfeather, describing her as a respected elder who had contributed significantly to the preservation of Cherokee language and culture. She talked about Elena's parents, Joseph and Rebecca Nightfeather, and how their deaths had been a loss to the entire community. As Sarah spoke, Elena felt the carefully constructed walls of her new identity beginning to crack. The names and faces she had tried so hard to forget came flooding back. her grandmother's hands teaching her to weave baskets, her father's voice singing Cherokee lullabies, her mother's laughter as she showed Elena how to identify medicinal plants in the forest. Sarah explained that they weren't trying to intrude on Elena's life, but they hoped she might be willing to share some memories or photographs for their exhibit. The Cherokee community had never forgotten the Night Feather family, she said, and many people still remembered Elena as a child. Elena managed to end the call by promising to think about it, but she knew she had no intention of participating in any exhibit. The life she had built was too important, too fragile to risk exposing to the truth of her past. She tried to put the conversation out of her mind, but it proved impossible. Over the following weeks, Elena found herself thinking constantly about Sarah's call. She began researching the Cherokee Cultural Center online, looking at photographs of their exhibits and programs. She found herself studying the faces in the photos, wondering if she would recognize anyone from her childhood. Internal conflict was exhausting. Part of her wanted to ignore the whole thing and continue living the life she had built. But another part, a part that had been growing stronger since the phone call, was desperately curious about what had become of her community, about whether anyone remembered her, about what it would feel like to speak Cherokee again or to taste the foods of her childhood. Marcus noticed that something was wrong. Elena had become distracted and moody, often staring off into space during conversations, or seeming to drift away during their evenings together. When he asked what was bothering her, she deflected with excuses about work stress or family issues, lies that came easily after years of practice but left her feeling hollow inside. The decision to visit the Cherokee Cultural Center came impulsively. Elena had driven to Asheville for a work conference, and on her way back to Charlotte, she found herself taking the exit toward the center instead of continuing straight home. She told herself she would just drive by, maybe look at the building from the outside, but she wouldn't go in. But as she sat in her car in the parking lot, looking at the building that housed so much of her people's history and culture, Elena found herself unable to drive away. The pull was too strong, the curiosity too overwhelming. She checked her appearance in the rearview mirror, making sure her makeup was perfect and her hair was in place. And then she walked through the front doors. The center was larger than she had expected, with high ceilings and displays that told the story of Cherokee history from ancient times to the present day. Elena wandered through the exhibits, her heart racing as she recognized artifacts and photographs that connected her to a world she had tried to leave behind. She was studying a display about Cherokee women when she heard her name called. Not Elena Blackwood, but her real name spoken in a voice that made her freeze in place. Elena Night Feather. She turned slowly, her heart hammering in her chest, to find herself face to face with a man who appeared to be in his 60s. He was tall and dignified, with silver hair pulled back in a traditional style and eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. His presence commanded respect, and Elena knew immediately that this was someone important in the Cherokee community. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I'm William Redhawk," he said, his voice gentle but carrying an unmistakable authority. "I'm the principal chief here, and I've been hoping to meet you for a very long time." Elena's mouth went dry. She wanted to deny who she was, to maintain the fiction that had protected her for so many years, but the words wouldn't come. Chief Redhawk's eyes held a kindness that made her defenses crumble, and she found herself unable to lie to him. "I think you have me confused with someone else," she managed to say, but her voice was weak and unconvincing. Chief Redhawk smiled, and Elena saw recognition in his expression that made her realize her carefully constructed disguise had never been as perfect as she had believed. "Your grandmother Mary was my mentor when I was young," he said. "She taught me about the old ways, about our language and our traditions. You have her eyes and her spirit. I would know you anywhere, Elena felt the world tilt around her. All the years of hiding, all the careful construction of her new identity, and this man had seen through it all in an instant. She wanted to run, to flee back to Charlotte and the safety of her false life, but something in Chief Redhawk's manner kept her rooted in place. "She never stopped talking about you," he continued. "Even after you left, she would speak of her granddaughter who had so much potential, who carried the wisdom of generations in her young heart. She always believed you would come home someday." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Her grandmother had never stopped thinking about her, had never stopped believing in her, even after Elena had abandoned everything the old woman had taught her. The guilt and shame were overwhelming, mixed with a grief she had thought she had processed years ago. Chief Redhawk seemed to understand her internal struggle. He didn't press her for explanations or demand that she account for her choices. Instead, he simply stood there, patient and understanding, waiting for her to find her voice. Chief Redhawk gestured toward a quiet corner of the cultural center, where two comfortable chairs sat beside a large window overlooking the Smoky Mountains. Elena followed him, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. The weight of his recognition pressed down on her chest, making it difficult to breathe normally. "Sit with me," he said, settling into one of the chairs with the grace of someone accustomed to carrying authority. "We have much to discuss." Elena perched on the edge of the opposite chair, ready to bolt at any moment. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her skirt, a nervous gesture that reminded her of her grandmother's habit of straightening her apron when she was thinking deeply. "You're probably wondering how I knew," Chief Redhawk began, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone who understood the power of words. "The truth is, we never lost track of you, not completely." Elena's heart sank. All these years, she had believed her transformation was complete, that she had successfully severed all ties to her past. "I don't understand." "Your grandmother spoke of you often during her final months. She worried about you, about the anger and pain that drove you away. She made me promise that if you ever returned, I would help you find your way back to yourself." The mention of her grandmother's final months hit Elena like a physical blow. She had convinced herself that Mary Nightfeather had been too proud, too traditional to understand her granddaughter's need to escape. Learning that the old woman had been worried about her, had made provisions for her return, shattered another piece of the defensive wall Elena had built around her heart. "She died believing I had abandoned her," Elena whispered, the words scraping against her throat. "No," Chief Redhawk said firmly. "She died understanding that you were in pain, that you felt you had no choice. Mary was wiser than you gave her credit for. She knew that forcing someone to stay connected to their heritage rarely works. She believed that if the teaching was strong enough, if the roots ran deep enough, you would eventually find your way back." Elena stared out the window at the mountains that had once been her playground, her cathedral, her entire world. The familiar ridgelines brought back memories she had worked so hard to suppress. Summer afternoons spent gathering wild berries with her grandmother, long winter evenings listening to stories by the fire. The sound of her father's truck coming up the gravel drive after work, her mother singing in the kitchen while she prepared dinner. "Why didn't anyone try to contact me before?" she asked. Chief Redhawk was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "We did, initially. But when it became clear that you wanted distance, we respected that choice. Our community believes in allowing people to walk their own paths, even when those paths lead away from us. Forcing someone to return before they're ready usually does more harm than good." Elena felt a stab of disappointment mixed with relief. Part of her had always wondered why no one had fought harder to keep her, why her departure had seemed to be accepted so easily. Now she understood that what she had interpreted as indifference had actually been respect for her autonomy, even when that autonomy led her away from her people. "The phone call a few weeks ago," Elena said slowly. "That wasn't a coincidence. Sarah Climbing Bear is my daughter-in-law, Chief Red Hawk confirmed. When we decided to create the exhibit about displaced families, your grandmother's story came up naturally. Mary's contributions to our community were significant, and her loss was felt deeply. Sarah suggested we try to reach out to you too. See if you might want to participate. But you knew I would say no. We hoped you might be curious enough to visit, even if you weren't ready to participate. Sarah planted a seed, knowing that seeds sometimes take time to grow. Elena realized she had been maneuvered, but not in a malicious way. The Cherokee community had extended an invitation without pressure, creating an opportunity for her to return. On her own terms. The sophistication of the approach impressed her despite her discomfort. "What happens now?" she asked. "That depends entirely on you," Chief Red Hawk replied. "You can walk out of here and return to your life in Charlotte. No one will contact you again. No one will interfere with the choices you've made. Or you can stay for a while, learn about what's happened in your community since you left maybe. Remember some things you've forgotten." The offer hung in the air between them, laden with possibilities that both thrilled and terrified Elena. She thought about Marcus, who was expecting her to return to Charlotte that evening. She thought about her job, her apartment, her carefully constructed life that required constant maintenance to sustain. "I can't just disappear from my life," she said finally. "I'm not asking you to. I'm suggesting you take some time to remember who you were before you decided who you wanted to become." Chief Red Hawk reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather pouch worn smooth with age. He placed it on the small table between their chairs. "Your grandmother wanted you to have this." Elena stared at the pouch, recognizing it immediately. It contained her grandmother's medicine bundle, a collection of sacred items that Mary Nightfeather had used in her healing work. Elena had watched her grandmother prepare the bundle countless times, had learned the significance of each item, the prayers that accompanied their use. "I can't take that," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. She left specific instructions. The bundle was to be given to you when you were ready to receive it. "I've been carrying it for 10 years, waiting for this moment." Elena's hands shook as she reached for the pouch. The leather was warm to the touch, and as she held it, she could swear she smelled her grandmother's perfume, a mixture of sage and the lavender soap she had always used. Opening the pouch felt like opening a door to her past. Inside were the familiar items: a piece of quartz crystal her grandmother had found in the mountains, a braid of sweetgrass, a small carved turtle that had belonged to Elena's great-grandmother, a piece of pottery that had been in their family for generations. At the bottom of the pouch was a folded piece of paper. Elena recognized her grandmother's handwriting immediately, the careful script that had taught her to read Cherokee syllabics. The note was brief, written in Cherokee: "My beloved granddaughter, you carry our ancestors in your blood and our future in your heart. When you are ready to remember who you are, come home to yourself. You are loved beyond measure." Elena's carefully applied makeup began to run as tears she had held back for years finally broke free. The grief she had suppressed, the guilt she had carried, the longing she had denied all poured out in heaving sobs that echoed through the quiet corner of the cultural center. Chief Red Hawk sat patiently, offering tissues but not trying to comfort her with words. He understood that some pain had to be felt fully before it could heal, that some tears needed to fall before clarity could emerge. When Elena finally composed herself, she felt different. Lighter somehow, as if the act of crying had released pressure that had been building inside her for years. "She knew I would come back," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "Mary always said that Cherokee blood calls to Cherokee blood, even across great distances and long silences. She believed you would eventually hear that call." Elena looked down at the medicine bundle in her hands, feeling the weight of generations, of tradition and wisdom. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to consider what it would mean to reclaim her heritage, to acknowledge the part of herself she had worked so hard to erase. "I have a life in Charlotte," she said, testing the words. "Yes, you do, and that life has value and meaning. But it's not the only life available to you." Chief Red Hawk stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the mountains. "When I was young, I thought I had to choose between the traditional ways and the modern world. I spent years trying to be something I wasn't, believing that success meant abandoning my culture. It took me a long time to understand that I could honor my ancestors while still living in today's world." He turned back to Elena, his expression gentle but serious. "You've spent 10 years learning to be someone else. Perhaps it's time to learn how to be yourself in the world you've chosen." The idea was revolutionary to Elena, who had always seen her identities as mutually exclusive. She had believed that embracing her Cherokee heritage would mean giving up everything she had built, that success in the white world required complete assimilation. "How?" she asked. "One step at a time. One honest conversation at a time. One authentic choice at a time." Chief Red Hawk returned to his chair and leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Your community will never forget you, Elena. We celebrated your successes even when you weren't here to share them. When you graduated from college, when you got your first job, when you received your promotions. Word travels in small communities, and we were proud of what you accomplished." Elena was stunned. She had assumed that leaving meant being forgotten, that her absence had erased her from the collective memory of her people. Learning that her achievements had been celebrated, that her journey had been followed from afar, added another layer of complexity to her emotions. "But I rejected everything you taught me," she said. "You used what we taught you, Chief Red Hawk. Corrected. The discipline, the determination, the intelligence, the resilience. These are Cherokee traits, Elena. You didn't abandon your heritage when you succeeded in the white world. You demonstrated it." The reframe was powerful, challenging Elena's fundamental understanding of her own story. She had seen her success as proof that abandoning her Cherokee identity was necessary. Chief Red Hawk was suggesting that her success was actually an expression of her Cherokee identity, even when she didn't recognize it as such. "What about the lies?" Elena asked. "What about the denial, the pretending? What about survival?" Chief Red Hawk responded. "Our people have a long history of adapting to hostile environments, of doing what was necessary to protect ourselves. And our families. Sometimes survival requires camouflage. The question isn't whether you did what you had to do. The question is what you want to do now." Elena felt the medicine bundle growing warm in her hands, as if it were responding to the conversation, to the possibility of reconnection. She thought about Marcus, about the wedding planning that had been making her increasingly uncomfortable, about the suburban future that felt more like a prison than a dream. "I don't know how to untangle the person I became from the person I was," she admitted. "Maybe you don't have to untangle them," Chief Red Hawk suggested. "Maybe you just have to integrate them." He stood again, smoothing his shirt with the practiced gesture of someone preparing to end an important conversation. "I'm going to make a suggestion, and I want you to consider it carefully. Stay here for a week. Not forever, not as a permanent. Return, just for a week. Learn about what's been happening in your community. Visit the places that mattered to you as a child. Talk to people who remember your grandmother. See if there's anything here that still speaks to you." The suggestion terrified Elena. A week away from Charlotte would require explanations to Marcus, to her boss, to the carefully maintained schedule that kept her false identity intact. "I can't just disappear for a week," she protested. "Why not? You're a successful professional with vacation time. You're an adult who can make her own choices. The question is whether you want to make this choice." Chief Red Hawk picked up a business card from the table and handed it to her. It was for a bed and breakfast in Cherokee, run by a woman named Grace Sequoia. "Grace is expecting you," he said. "Whether you come tonight or next month or never." She have a room ready. She was your grandmother's closest friend, and she's been hoping to meet you for many years. Elena stared at the card, feeling the weight of decision pressing down on her. She thought about her apartment in Charlotte, about Marcus waiting for her return, about the life she had built that suddenly felt insubstantial compared to the solid presence of Chief Redhawk and the warm weight of her grandmother's medicine bundle. "What if I don't fit anymore?" she asked. "What if I've been gone too long, changed too much?" "Then you'll know that too," Chief Redhawk said simply. "But you'll know it because you tried, not because you were afraid to find out." Elena stood slowly, her legs still unsteady beneath her. She looked around the cultural center, at the displays that told the story of her people, at the photographs of faces that looked like her own, at the artifacts that connected her to a history she had tried to forget. "1 week," she said finally. "Chief." Redhawk smiled, and Elena saw approval in his expression that warmed her in a way she hadn't felt in years. "1 week," he agreed. "And Elena?" She turned back to him, her hand on her purse containing the medicine bundle. "Welcome home." Elena sat in her rental car outside Grace Sequoia's bed and breakfast as the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that she remembered from her childhood. Her phone had been buzzing incessantly for the past hour with calls and texts from Marcus, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. How could she explain that she was staying in Cherokee for a week without revealing everything she had hidden from him? The bed and breakfast was a beautiful 2-story log cabin with wraparound porches and flower boxes overflowing with mountain laurel and wild azaleas. Smoke curled from the chimney and warm light spilled from the windows, creating an atmosphere of welcome that both comforted and intimidated Elena. She had finally sent Marcus a brief text claiming a family emergency, promising to call him later to explain. The lie came easily, as they always did, but this time it felt different. This time, she wasn't sure she wanted to maintain the fiction anymore. Taking a deep breath, Elena grabbed her overnight bag and walked up the gravel path to the front door. Before she could knock, the door swung open to reveal a woman in her 70s with silver hair braided down, her back and eyes that sparkled with warmth and mischief. "Elena Night Feather," Grace Sequoia said, her voice rich with emotion. "Lord have mercy, you look just like your mama when she was your age." Without waiting for a response, Grace pulled Elena into a fierce hug that smelled of wood smoke and bread baking. Elena found herself returning the embrace, her body remembering the comfort of being held by someone who knew her real name, her real history. Come in," Grace said, ushering Elena through the front door. "I've got stew simmering and cornbread in the oven. You must be exhausted from all that thinking you've been doing." The interior of the bed and breakfast was cozy and welcoming, with handmade quilts draped over comfortable furniture and Native American artwork adorning the walls. Elena recognized some of the pieces as her grandmother's work, pottery and baskets, that Mary Night Feather had created decades ago. "You kept her things," Elena said softly, running her fingers along the rim of a clay bowl she remembered watching her grandmother shape. "Your grandmother was like a sister to me," Grace replied, setting Elena's bag beside the staircase. "When she passed, I couldn't bear to see her work scattered to strangers. I've been keeping it safe, hoping someday you'd come back to claim it." Elena felt tears threatening again, overwhelmed by the generosity of this woman who had maintained her grandmother's legacy for a decade without any guarantee that Elena would ever return to appreciate it. "I don't deserve this kindness," Elena whispered. Grace fixed her with a stern look that reminded Elena of her grandmother's expression when she was about to deliver an important lesson. "Deserve has nothing to do with it, child. Love doesn't require deserving. It just is." Grace led Elena to the kitchen, where she ladled steaming bowls of traditional Cherokee stew made with beans, corn, and squash. The aroma transported Elena instantly to her childhood, to countless evenings spent around her grandmother's table, listening to stories and learning about her heritage. "Chief Redhawk called to let me know you'd be staying," Grace said, settling across from Elena at the worn wooden table. "He said you're ready to remember some things." Elena tasted the stew, and the familiar flavors exploded across her palate, triggering a flood of sense memories she had worked hard to suppress. Her grandmother's hands taught her to prepare the same dish. The sound of Cherokee being spoken around the dinner table. The feeling of belonging to something larger than herself. "I'm not sure I remember how to be Cherokee anymore," Elena admitted. Grace chuckled, a sound like water running over stones. "Honey, being Cherokee isn't something you do. It's something you are. It's in your bones, in your blood, in the way you think about the world. You can cover it up, ignore it, deny it, but you can't make it go away." After dinner, Grace showed Elena to her room on the second floor. It was simple but comfortable, with a window that looked out over the mountains and a quilt on the bed that Elena recognized as one of her grandmother's designs. "Your grandmother made that quilt the year you were born," Grace said, smoothing the fabric with gentle hands. "She said it would keep you warm when she couldn't." Elena ran her fingers over the intricate pattern, remembering the countless nights she had slept under this same quilt as a child. Her grandmother had told her stories about each piece of fabric, about the family members who had worn the dresses and shirts that had been transformed into this beautiful covering. "Why didn't anyone tell me she was sick?" Elena asked the question. That had been haunting her since her conversation with Chief Redhawk. Grace sat heavily on the edge of the bed, her expression sad but understanding. "She made us promise not to contact you. She said you had made your choice, and she wouldn't burden you with guilt about hers. But I would have come back. I would have taken care of her. Would you have? Or would you have felt obligated to come back, resentful of the disruption to the life you'd built?" The question hit Elena like a slap. She wanted to protest, to insist that she would have returned out of love, not obligation. But she wasn't sure that was true. 10 years ago, she had been so committed to her new identity, so determined to escape her past, that she might have seen her grandmother's illness as an inconvenient interruption rather than a chance to reconnect. "Mary knew you better than you knew yourself," Grace continued. "She understood that forcing you to come back before you were ready would only create more pain for both of you. She loved you enough to let you go completely, trusting that if the foundation she'd built was strong enough, you'd eventually find your way back." Elena sank into the chair by the window, looking out at the familiar silhouette of the mountains against the star-filled sky. The weight of her grandmother's sacrifice was almost unbearable. Mary Nightfeather had died alone, protecting Elena from the guilt that might have driven her home out of duty rather than love. "She talked about you every day," Grace said softly. "She followed your life through the internet, through friends who had friends in Charlotte. She knew about your job, your success, your relationship with that man you're with now." Elena's head snapped up. "She knew about Marcus? She knew you were trying to build a different kind of life. She worried about whether you were happy, whether you were being true to yourself. But she never judged your choices." Elena felt her phone buzzing again in her purse. Marcus had called 6 times and sent a dozen texts, his messages growing increasingly frantic. She knew she would have to deal with the situation eventually, but she wasn't ready yet. She needed time to process everything that was happening, to understand what it meant for her future. "What happens if I decide I want to stay?" Elena asked. "What happens if I want to come back to this life?" Grace smiled, but her expression was complicated. "Then you'll have some difficult conversations ahead of you. Coming back isn't as simple as leaving was. You have responsibilities now, commitments, people who depend on you. The question isn't whether you can come back. The question is whether you can integrate who you've become with who you've always been." Elena spent the night lying awake under her grandmother's quilt, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the impossible complexity of her situation. She had built a life in Charlotte based on a lie, but it wasn't entirely false. She genuinely loved her job, took pride in her accomplishments, and valued many of the relationships she had formed. The problem was that none of it was built on a foundation of truth. The next morning, Grace woke Elena before dawn with a gentle knock on her door. "Come on, honey. There's someone who wants to see you." Elena dressed quickly and followed Grace out to the porch, where an elderly man sat in a rocking chair, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. He looked up as Elena approached, and she recognized him immediately despite the years that had passed. "Uncle Thomas," she breathed, using the honorary title for the elder who had been her grandmother's closest friend and spiritual advisor. Thomas Crow Feather stood slowly, his aged body moving with the deliberate care of someone who had lived through many decades. His eyes, sharp and knowing, studied Elena's face with the intensity of someone reading a beloved book he hadn't seen in years. "Little Night Bird," he said, using the childhood nickname that only her grandmother and a few other elders had ever called her. "You've grown tall in the world outside our mountains." Elena felt tears threatening again at the sound of her childhood name. No one had called her that since she was 18, since she had made the decision to leave everything behind. Hearing it now felt like being wrapped in a blanket she had forgotten she owned. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me," Elena said. Thomas chuckled, settling back into his rocking chair and gesturing for Elena to take the seat beside him. "Child, I remember every story your grandmother told about you, every prayer she offered for your well-being, every tear she shed missing you. How could I forget?" Grace brought Elena a cup of coffee and a plate of fry bread, then tactfully retreated into the house, leaving Elena alone with the man who had been like a grandfather to her during her childhood. "Your grandmother came to me before she died," Thomas said, his voice carrying the cadence of someone accustomed to storytelling. "She was worried about you, about the path you had chosen. She asked me to perform a ceremony for you, to ask the ancestors to guide you safely through your journey in the outside world." Elena's breath caught in her throat. Even in death, her grandmother had been looking out for her, ensuring that she was spiritually protected even as she rejected her Cherokee identity. "She never stopped believing you would find your way back to yourself," Thomas continued. "She said the warrior spirit was strong in you, that you would fight for what you needed, even if it meant fighting against your own heritage for a while." The old man reached into the leather pouch at his side and withdrew a small carved wooden figure. Elena recognized it immediately as a representation of a nighthawk, the bird her grandmother had named her for. "She asked me to give this to you when you returned," Thomas said, placing the carving in Elena's palm. "She said it would remind you that even when you're flying in darkness, you're still flying." Elena held the carving up to the morning light, admiring the intricate detail of the feathers, the fierce expression of the bird's eyes. Her grandmother had been an accomplished woodcarver, and this piece represented some of her finest work. "I don't know if I can do this," Elena said quietly. "I don't know if I can bridge the gap between who I've been and who I am now." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, sipping his coffee and watching the sun rise over the mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "The Cherokee have always been a people caught between worlds. We've survived by learning to adapt, to take what we needed from different cultures while maintaining our core identity. You're not the first of our people to walk in multiple worlds, and you won't be the last." He turned to look at Elena directly, his ancient eyes holding wisdom accumulated over decades of living. "The question isn't whether you can bridge the gap. The question is whether you're brave enough to try." Elena spent the rest of the morning walking through Cherokee with Thomas and Grace, visiting places that had been important to her as a child. They went to the school where she had learned to read Cherokee syllabics, to the river where she had spent countless summer afternoons, to the ceremonial ground where she had participated in traditional dances and celebrations. At each location, Elena felt layers of her constructed identity peeling away, revealing the Cherokee woman who had always existed beneath the surface. The landscape itself seemed to be calling to something deep inside her, awakening memories and feelings she had worked so hard to suppress. They visited the cemetery where her parents and grandmother were buried. Elena stood before Mary Nightfeather's grave, reading the inscription that was written in both English and Cherokee. She knelt and placed the carved nighthawk on the headstone, whispering an apology in Cherokee for staying away so long. "She hears you," Thomas said softly, "and she forgives you. The question is whether you can forgive yourself." That afternoon, Elena finally called Marcus. She had been dreading the conversation, uncertain how to explain her absence without revealing truths she wasn't ready to share. But she knew she couldn't continue avoiding him indefinitely. "Elena, thank God," Marcus said when he answered on the first ring. "I've been worried sick. Where are you? What's this family emergency?" Elena took a deep breath, looking out at the Vide, mountains that had shaped her childhood, drawing strength from their ancient presence. "I'm in Cherokee, North Carolina," she said. "There are some things about my family, about my background, that I need to figure out." "Cherokee? I thought you said your family was Italian." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of all the lies she had told, all the truth she had hidden. The moment of reckoning had arrived sooner than she had expected. "Marcus, there are things about me that you don't know. Things I should have told you a long time ago." "What kind of things?" Elena looked at her reflection in the window, seeing her grandmother's features in her own face, recognizing the Cherokee woman she had always been beneath the carefully constructed facade. "I think we need to have a serious conversation when I get back to Charlotte." The line was quiet for a long moment. Elena could practically hear Marcus thinking, trying to understand what she was telling him. "Are you saying you've been lying to me about your family?" "I'm saying that I've been lying to myself about who I am, and that's made it impossible for me to be completely honest with anyone else, including you." Marcus's voice grew cold. "I don't understand what's happening, Elena. We're supposed to be planning our future together, and now you're telling me you've been living some kind of lie?" Elena felt her heart breaking, not just for Marcus but for the relationship they had built on a foundation of deception. She had genuinely cared for him, had tried to make their life together work, but she realized now that it had been doomed. From the start. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I know this is confusing and hurtful. When I come back, I'll explain everything. But right now I need some time to figure out who I really am." After she hung up, Elena sat on Grace's porch swing, watching the mountains change color as the sun moved across the sky. She felt simultaneously more lost and more found than she had ever been in her life. Grace joined her on the porch, settling into the swing with 2 glasses of sweet tea. "Difficult conversation?" Grace asked. "The first of many, I think." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the mountains, the birds calling to each other across the valleys, the wind moving through the trees. Elena felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging that her life in Charlotte had never provided. "What happens if I want to stay?" Elena asked. "What happens if I don't want to go back to Charlotte?" Grace looked at her with the knowing expression of someone who had seen many people struggle with similar questions. "Then you'll have to decide what kind of life you want to build here, and whether you're willing to do the hard work of becoming whole again." Elena's second day in Cherokee began with the sound of drumming drifting through her window. She dressed quickly and followed the rhythmic beating to a clearing behind Grace's bed and breakfast, where she found a group of teenagers learning traditional Cherokee dances from a woman she didn't recognize. The instructor was perhaps 40 years old, with long black hair adorned with feathers and traditional clothing that spoke of deep cultural knowledge. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who had been dancing these steps since childhood, her voice calling out instructions in Cherokee as the young people struggled to match her movements. Elena stood at the edge of the clearing, mesmerized by the sight of Cherokee youth embracing their heritage with an enthusiasm she had never felt as a teenager. When she was their age, she had seen traditional practices as obstacles to her future success, barriers that kept her trapped in a world she was desperate to escape. Beautiful, isn't it? Grace appeared beside her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. That's Rebecca Smoke, Mary's great niece. She moved back here from Atlanta 5 years ago to help preserve our traditional dances. Elena accepted the coffee gratefully, studying Rebecca's face for familiar features. She could see traces of her grandmother in the woman's bone structure, in the way she held her shoulders when she demonstrated a particularly complex movement. She gave up a career in marketing to come back here? Elena asked. She said the corporate world was killing her spirit slowly, Grace replied. Rebecca realized she could use her business skills to help our community, preserve and share our culture, rather than selling products for people who didn't care about anything except profit. Elena felt a stab of recognition at the description. How many mornings had she woken up feeling drained by the meaninglessness of her work, by the constant pressure to sell things people didn't really need? She had convinced herself that the emptiness was normal, that everyone felt disconnected from their work to some degree. Rebecca noticed Elena watching and approached with a warm smile that transformed her serious dancing expression into something welcoming and curious. You must be Elena, she said, extending her hand. Chief Redhawk told me you were visiting. I'm Rebecca Smoke, Mary Nightfeather's great niece. Elena shook Rebecca's hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of hands-on work, of a life lived in connection with practical skills rather than just abstract concepts. I remember you from when we were children, Rebecca continued. You were older than me, but I always admired how fearless you were. You climbed the tallest trees, caught the biggest fish, asked the most challenging questions during story time. Elena laughed, surprised by this description of her childhood self. She had forgotten her own boldness. The curiosity and courage that had defined her before fear and ambition had redirected her path. I don't feel very fearless these days, Elena admitted. Maybe not, Rebecca said, glancing meaningfully at the teenagers still practicing their dance steps. But it takes courage to come back after being away so long. It takes courage to question the life you've built. Rebecca invited Elena to join the dance practice, but Elena declined, claiming she had forgotten the steps. The truth was more complicated. She remembered the dances perfectly, could feel the movements in her muscle memory, but she was afraid of what it would mean to participate, afraid of how it would feel to surrender to the rhythm and the tradition. Instead, she spent the morning exploring Cherokee with Grace, visiting the tribal offices and learning about the economic and social challenges facing the community. She was surprised by the sophistication of the tribal government, by the successful businesses and educational programs that had been developed to support Cherokee families while preserving their cultural identity. Your grandmother would be proud of what we've accomplished, Grace said as they toured a new language immersion school where children learn Cherokee as their first language. She always believed that our culture could thrive in the modern world if we were smart about adaptation. Elena watched 5-year-olds playing games entirely in Cherokee, their laughter echoing through classrooms decorated with traditional artwork and modern technology. The sight filled her with a complex mixture of pride and regret. These children would grow up bilingual and bicultural, comfortable navigating both Cherokee and mainstream American society, without feeling they had to choose between them. I could have had both, Elena said quietly, watching a little girl who reminded her of herself at that age. You still can, Grace replied. It's not too late to learn how to live in both worlds. That afternoon, Chief Redhawk invited Elena to attend a tribal council meeting where they were discussing economic development, projects and cultural preservation initiatives. Elena found herself fascinated by the complex discussions about balancing traditional values with modern necessities, about finding ways to generate revenue that honored Cherokee principles. We're always looking for people with your kind of experience, Chief Red Hawk mentioned after the meeting. Someone who understands both Cherokee culture and mainstream business practices could be invaluable in helping U.S. develop sustainable economic opportunities. Elena felt a flutter of possibility at his words, but also anxiety about the implications. Was he suggesting she could find a way to use her professional skills in service of her community? The idea was both thrilling and terrifying that evening. Elena called her boss in Charlotte to request an extended leave of absence. Janet Morrison had been Elena's mentor for 3 years, and Elena trusted her more than anyone else in her professional life. "Elena, I have to say I'm concerned," Janet said after Elena explained that she was dealing with a family situation that required more time than she had initially expected. "You've never mentioned having family in North Carolina, and this request is very unlike you." Elena stared out at the mountains, gathering courage for another difficult conversation. Janet had been good to her, had championed her career advancement, and supported her through professional challenges. She deserved honesty, even if it was difficult to provide. "Janet, there are aspects of my background that I haven't shared with you or anyone else at the company. I'm dealing with some family issues that are forcing me to reevaluate some fundamental assumptions about my identity." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Elena could hear Janet thinking, probably trying to reconcile this mysterious family situation with the Elena Blackwood she thought she knew. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" Janet asked finally. "No, nothing like that. I'm just discovering that there are parts of myself I've been ignoring for a long time, and I need to figure out how to integrate them with the professional life I've built. How long do you need?" Elena appreciated that Janet didn't push for details, didn't demand explanations that Elena wasn't ready to provide. "I'm not sure. Maybe another week, maybe longer. I know this is disruptive, and I understand if the company can't accommodate an open-ended leave. You're one of our best employees, Elena. We'll figure something out. But I hope you'll feel comfortable sharing more details when you're ready. We care about you as a person, not just as a worker." After hanging up, Elena felt both relieved and guilty. Another relationship built on incomplete truths. Another person who would eventually need to learn about the deception that had shaped their interactions. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Elena was helping Grace prepare breakfast when a car pulled into the driveway, and Marcus Wellington stepped out, looking completely out of place in his expensive suit and city shoes. Elena's heart sank as she watched him through the kitchen window, taking in the rustic surroundings with obvious discomfort. She had hoped to have more time before facing him, more time to understand her own feelings before having to explain them to someone else. "Friend of yours?" Grace asked, following Elena's gaze. "My boyfriend from Charlotte," Elena replied, already dreading the conversation to come. "He doesn't look happy." Elena walked out to meet Marcus, who was standing beside his BMW looking like he had landed on an alien planet. His expression was a mixture of confusion, hurt, and anger that made Elena's stomach churn with anxiety. "This is where you've been?" Marcus asked without preamble, gesturing at the bed and breakfast and the mountains beyond. "This is the family emergency that was so important you couldn't talk to me about it." "Marcus, I know this is confusing. Doesn't begin to cover it. Elena, I drove 4 hours to find my girlfriend staying at some mountain retreat, talking about identity crises and family secrets. What the hell is going on?" Elena looked at Marcus, really looked at him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time since they had been together. He was handsome and successful, and completely wrong for her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Their relationship had been built on a version of herself that was fundamentally false, and she realized now that she had never loved him as much as she had loved the validation he represented. "Can we walk?" she asked, gesturing toward a trail that led into the woods behind Grace's property. Marcus looked down at his leather dress shoes with obvious reluctance, but he followed Elena onto the path. They walked in silence for several minutes, the sounds of the forest gradually calming Elena's nerves while seeming to increase Marcus's agitation. "This is about your family, isn't it?" Marcus said finally. "About whatever you've been hiding from me." Elena stopped walking and turned to face him, seeing her reflection in his expensive sunglasses. She looked different than she had just a few days ago, less polished but more authentic, less perfect but more real. "My name isn't Elena Blackwood," she said simply. "It's Elena Nightfeather. I'm Cherokee." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, his expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and something that might have been betrayal. "You're Native American?" he asked, as if he needed to hear the words again to process them. "Half Cherokee, yes. I grew up on the reservation about 30 miles from here. I changed my name and reinvented myself when I went to college." "Why?" Marcus's voice was sharp with hurt and anger. "Why would you lie about something like that?" Elena felt defensive instincts rising, the urge to explain and justify her choices. But standing in the forest where she had played as a child, surrounded by the mountains that had shaped her grandmother's stories, she found herself reluctant to apologize for decisions that had been born from pain and necessity. "Because I thought I had to choose," she said instead. "Because I believed that being Cherokee would limit my opportunities, that I couldn't be successful in your world while maintaining my heritage." "My world?" Marcus's voice rose. "What does that mean, my world?" Elena studied his face, seeing the genuine confusion there. Marcus wasn't a bad person, but he was a product of privilege and assumptions that he had never been forced to examine. He lived in a world where identity was simple, where success followed predictable patterns, where people like Elena's grandmother existed only in history books and museum displays. The world where people assume I'm more competent when they think. "I'm white," Elena said quietly. "The world where my Cherokee name sounds exotic and foreign instead of beautiful and meaningful. The world where my grandmother's wisdom is dismissed as primitive superstition while your family's traditions are respected as cultural heritage." Marcus pulled off his sunglasses and Elena could see him struggling to process what she was telling him. She felt sorry for him, recognizing that her revelation was challenging everything he thought he knew about their relationship and about her. "So everything between us has been based on a lie?" he asked. Elena considered the question carefully, knowing that her answer would determine the future of their relationship. "Not everything," she said finally. "My feelings for you were real. My commitment to building a life with you was genuine. But yes, it was built on me being someone I'm not." "And now you want to be Cherokee again?" Elena heard the skepticism in his voice, the implication that her identity was something she could put on and take off like clothing. She realized that Marcus would never understand the complexity of her situation, would never appreciate the courage it took to reclaim a heritage that required confronting years of self-denial and internalized shame. "I want to be myself," she said. "I want to stop pretending that half of my identity doesn't exist. What does that mean for us?" Elena looked at Marcus, seeing the life they had been planning together, the suburban house, the country club memberships, the children who would be raised with no knowledge of their Cherokee heritage. She saw the compromises she would have to make, the continued denial of her authentic self that such a life would require. "I think it means we're not as compatible as we thought we were," she said gently. Marcus's face crumpled with hurt and anger. "You're throwing away our entire relationship because of some identity crisis. I'm choosing to be honest about who I am instead of continuing to live a lie," Elena corrected. They walked back to Grace's bed and breakfast in tense silence. Marcus gathered his things quickly, clearly eager to escape the uncomfortable situation and return to the familiar world of Charlotte. "If you change your mind, if you decide you want your real life back, call me," he said before getting in his car. Elena watched him drive away, feeling sad but also relieved. She had expected the conversation to be more devastating, had feared that losing Marcus would leave her completely adrift. Instead, she felt lighter, as if she had set down a heavy burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. Grace appeared beside her as Marcus's car disappeared around a bend in the mountain road. "That looked difficult," Grace said. "Less difficult than I expected," Elena replied. "I think I've been holding onto a relationship that stopped fitting me a long time ago." "Sometimes we outgrow people the same way we outgrow clothes," Grace observed. "It doesn't mean the relationship was wrong when it started, just that you've become someone different." That evening, Elena joined Rebecca's dance practice for the first time. She felt awkward and self-conscious initially, her body struggling to remember movements that had once been as natural as breathing. But as the drumming continued and the other dancers encouraged her efforts, muscle memory gradually took over. Elena found herself moving with increasing confidence, her feet finding the ancient rhythms, her arms expressing stories that had been passed down through generations of Cherokee women. For the first time in years, she felt completely present in her body, completely connected to her heritage, completely herself. When the practice ended, Rebecca approached her with a smile that radiated approval and welcome. "You dance like your grandmother," she said. "She would be proud to see you remembering who you are." Elena felt tears of joy rather than sadness for the first time since arriving in Cherokee. She was beginning to understand that reclaiming her heritage didn't require abandoning everything she had accomplished or learned. It required integration, courage, and the willingness to live authentically, even when authenticity was complicated and challenging. As she lay in bed that night under her grandmother's quilt, Elena realized she was no longer the same person who had walked into the Cherokee Cultural Center just 4 days earlier. The scared, conflicted woman who had spent a decade hiding from her true identity was being replaced by someone stronger, someone willing to embrace the full complexity of her heritage and her modern life. The question was no longer whether she could return to her Cherokee identity. The question was how she could build a life that honored both her heritage and her accomplishments, that allowed her to be fully herself in a world that often demanded she choose sides. For the first time in years, Elena fell asleep feeling excited about the future rather than anxious about maintaining the facades that had defined her adult life. Elena's phone rang at 6 in the morning, jolting her awake from dreams filled with Cherokee ceremonies and dancing figures. The caller ID showed her apartment complex manager in Charlotte, and Elena's heart sank as she realized she had completely forgotten about her lease and the responsibilities waiting for her in her old life. "Miss Blackwood, I'm sorry to call so early, but we have a situation," the manager said without preamble. "Your boyfriend came by yesterday, demanding to get into your apartment. When I explained that I couldn't let him in without your permission, he became quite agitated. He mentioned something about you having some kind of breakdown." Elena closed her eyes, imagining Marcus's frustration and embarrassment as he tried to make sense of her sudden transformation. She felt guilty for putting him in an impossible position, but also angry that he had characterized her journey of self-discovery as a mental health crisis. "I'm dealing with some family issues," Elena said carefully. "Marcus and I have ended our relationship, so he shouldn't have access to my apartment under any circumstances. Of course. But Ms. Blackwood, your rent is due in 3 days, and we haven't received your usual advance payment. Is everything all right financially?" Elena realized with a start that she had been living in a bubble for the past week, focused entirely on emotional and spiritual concerns, while her practical responsibilities accumulated like storm clouds on the horizon. Her job, her apartment, her entire carefully constructed life in Charlotte was waiting for decisions she wasn't sure she was ready to make. "I'll call you back today with payment arrangements," Elena promised, ending the call with a growing sense of anxiety about the complexity of her situation. Grace appeared at her bedroom door with coffee and the knowing expression of someone who had overheard the conversation. "Real life catching up with you?" Grace asked gently. I can't just disappear from my responsibilities, Elena said, accepting the coffee gratefully. I have a lease, a job, bills to pay. I have a life in Charlotte that I can't just abandon. No one's asking you to abandon anything, Grace replied, settling into the chair by the window. But you do need to decide what kind of life you want to build moving forward. Elena spent the morning walking through Cherokee, trying to imagine what it would mean to relocate permanently to the mountains. The community was beautiful and welcoming, but it was also small and economically limited. The professional opportunities that existed were primarily in tourism, tribal government, or education, all meaningful work, but representing a significant step down in salary and prestige from her corporate position. She found herself at the Cherokee Language Center, where elderly tribal members worked with linguists to preserve and revitalize their ancestral tongue. Elena listened to conversations in Cherokee, surprised by how much she still understood despite years of disuse. An elderly woman named Anna Kingbird noticed Elena's interest and invited her to join a conversation circle where participants practiced speaking Cherokee about everyday topics. Elena hesitated, self-conscious about her rusty language skills, but Anna's encouragement was impossible to resist. Your accent is perfect, Anna said after Elena managed a halting introduction in Cherokee. You learned from someone who spoke the old way. My grandmother, Mary Nightfeather, Elena replied in Cherokee, the words feeling foreign and familiar simultaneously. Ah, Anna nodded with recognition. Mary was a purist about pronunciation. She refused to let the young people develop sloppy speech habits. You carry her teachings in your voice. Elena felt a surge of pride and connection that surprised her. With its intensity, speaking Cherokee awakened something dormant in her brain, accessing memories and thought patterns that existed only in her ancestral language. She realized that some concepts and emotions could only be fully expressed in Cherokee, that abandoning the language had meant losing access to entire categories of understanding about the world. After the language circle, Elena drove to her grandmother's old house, which had been empty since Mary's death. Chief Redhawk had given her the key, explaining that the property still belonged to Elena as Mary's sole heir, though she had never claimed it. The house was smaller than Elena remembered, a modest structure that had been built by her great-grandfather. In the 1940s, inside, everything remained exactly as her grandmother had left it, preserved by the dry mountain air and the care of neighbors who had checked on the property. Periodically, Elena moved through the room slowly, touching familiar objects and feeling the weight of generational memory. Her grandmother's rocking chair still sat by the window where Mary had done her beadwork. The kitchen still smelled faintly of sage and the herbal teas Mary had brewed for medicinal purposes. The walls were covered with photographs of family members going back 4 generations, including many pictures of Elena as a child that she had forgotten existed. In her grandmother's bedroom, Elena found a cedar chest filled with traditional clothing, beadwork, and ceremonial items that represented decades of Mary's artistic and spiritual practice. At the bottom of the chest was a large manila envelope with Elena's name written in Cherokee syllabics. Inside the envelope were legal documents, transferring ownership of the house and property to Elena, along with a letter written in Cherokee. That brought tears to her eyes. My beloved granddaughter, if you are reading this, it means you have found your way back to yourself and to our family home. This house has sheltered 4 generations of our family, and I hope it will shelter many more. Whether you choose to live here or sell it, know that you carry our home with you wherever you go. The ancestors are proud of your journey, even when that journey led you far from these mountains. You have learned to survive in the world beyond our community, and that knowledge makes you valuable to our people in ways you may not yet understand. Trust your heart, honor your heritage, and remember that being Cherokee is not about where you live, but about how you live. Elena sank into her grandmother's rocking chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of choices facing her. She owned property in Cherokee, had professional skills that could benefit the tribal community, and was slowly rebuilding connections that could provide the foundation for a meaningful life in the mountains. But she also had commitments and relationships in Charlotte that couldn't be easily dismissed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca Smoke. Emergency Tribal Council meeting tonight about the casino expansion proposal. Chief Redhawk suggested you might want to attend since you have relevant business experience. Elena realized that her week of self-discovery was about to intersect with real-world responsibilities in ways she hadn't anticipated. The Cherokee Nation was facing complex economic decisions that required exactly the kind of expertise she had developed during her corporate career. The tribal council meeting was held in a modern conference room that could have belonged to any corporate headquarters. Elena was surprised by the sophistication of the presentation materials and the depth of financial analysis being discussed. The casino expansion proposal represented a $40 million investment that could provide significant revenue for tribal programs, but also raised concerns about environmental impact and cultural preservation. The tourism industry consultants are recommending we partner with a major hotel chain to develop a resort complex. Chief Redhawk explained to the council. The revenue projections are impressive, but we need to ensure that any development aligns with our values and serves our community's long-term interests. Elena found herself studying the financial projections with the analytical skills she had developed during her corporate career. She noticed several assumptions in the consultant's report that seemed overly optimistic and identified potential risks that hadn't been adequately addressed. When Chief Redhawk asked for community input, Elena surprised herself by standing up to speak. I've reviewed the consultant's financial projections, and I have some concerns about their revenue assumptions, she said, her voice carrying the confidence she had developed during years of corporate presentations. The projected tourism growth rates don't account for regional economic volatility, and the market analysis seems to underestimate competition from other regional destinations. The room fell quiet as Elena outlined her analysis, offering alternative scenarios and suggesting additional due diligence measures that could protect the tribe's investment. She found herself energized by the opportunity to use her professional skills in service of her community, to apply corporate expertise to advance Cherokee interests rather than enriching distant shareholders. After the meeting, several council members approached Elena with questions and comments about her analysis. She realized that her unique combination of Cherokee heritage and mainstream business experience made her valuable to the community in ways she had never considered. You should think about moving back permanently, said Dr. Jessica Swimmer, a council member who served as the tribal attorney. We need people who can navigate both worlds, who understand our values but also know how to protect our interests in complex business negotiations. Chief Redhawk joined their conversation, his expression thoughtful and encouraging. Your grandmother always said you had the mind for business and the heart for justice, he said. Perhaps this is how you honor both parts of your heritage. Elena drove back to Grace's bed and breakfast with her mind racing. The tribal council meeting had revealed possibilities she hadn't considered, ways she could contribute to her community while using skills she had worked hard to develop. But it had also highlighted the complexity of trying to rebuild a life from scratch, the challenges of starting over professionally and personally. That night, Elena called Janet Morrison to discuss her employment situation more honestly than she had previously. Janet, I need to tell you something about my background that might help you understand what I'm dealing with. Elena began, gathering courage for another difficult conversation about her identity. She explained her Cherokee heritage and the identity crisis that had brought her back to the mountains, omitting some details but providing enough context for Janet to understand the significance of her journey. Elena, I have to say I'm impressed by your honesty, Janet said after a long pause. I can't imagine how difficult it's been to compartmentalize such a fundamental part of your identity. But I'm also concerned about what this means for your career here. I'm exploring options for using my professional skills in a way that feels more authentic to who I am, Elena said carefully. There might be opportunities to work with Native American organizations that could benefit from my corporate experience. Are you talking about leaving the company permanently? Elena realized she was at a crossroads that required a definitive choice. She could return to Charlotte, resume her corporate career, and try to integrate her Cherokee identity into her existing life. Or she could take the leap of building something entirely new, using her skills to serve her community while accepting the financial and professional risks that such a choice would entail. I think I might be, Elena said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Well, if you decide to make a change, you should know that you'll have an excellent reference from me, Janet said graciously. You're one of the most talented people I've worked with, and any organization would be lucky to have you. After ending the call, Elena sat on Grace's porch watching the stars emerge over the mountains. She thought about the life she had built in Charlotte, the professional recognition she had earned, the financial security she had achieved. All of it was real and valuable, but none of it had ever made her feel as alive and purposeful as she had felt during the tribal council meeting. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Chief Redhawk wants to know if you'd be interested in consulting on the casino project. Part-time initially, but could develop into something bigger if you're interested. Elena stared at the message, recognizing it as an invitation to begin building the kind of life she had never dared to imagine. She could use her corporate expertise to advance Cherokee economic interests while remaining connected to her heritage and community. It wouldn't be as financially lucrative as her Charlotte position, and it would require significant lifestyle adjustments, but it offered something her corporate career had never provided: alignment between her values and her work. The next morning, Elena called her apartment manager in Charlotte to give notice on her lease. She contacted her bank to arrange for the transfer of her savings and investments. She began the practical process of relocating her life from the city to the mountains, from the corporate world to the tribal community. Grace found her making lists and phone calls on the porch, surrounded by papers and wearing the determined expression of someone who had finally made a difficult decision. You're really doing it, Grace observed with approval. You're coming home. I'm building a new kind of home, Elena corrected. One that includes everything I've learned and everyone I've become. Elena spent her final day in Cherokee as a visitor, walking through places that would soon become familiar again. She visited her parents' graves, promising them that their daughter would honor their Cherokee legacy, while using the opportunities they had died too young to see. She stopped by the language center to arrange for regular conversation practice, determined to regain full fluency in Cherokee. Most importantly, she met with Chief Redhawk to discuss the consulting opportunity and her long-term goals for contributing to the community. Your grandmother would be proud, he said as they finalized the arrangement for Elena to return in 2 weeks as an official consultant for the casino project. She always believed that our people's success in the outside world would eventually benefit our community. You're proof that she was right. Elena looked out at the mountains that had shaped her childhood, feeling the complex emotions of someone who was about to begin a new chapter of life that was simultaneously a return to her origins and a leap into an unknown future. She was no longer Elena Blackwood, the corporate executive who had hidden her heritage to achieve mainstream success. But she wasn't exactly Elena Nightfeather either, the Cherokee girl who had left the mountains in pain and anger a decade ago. She was someone new, a Cherokee woman who had learned to navigate the complexities of contemporary American society, while maintaining her connection to ancestral wisdom, someone who could bridge worlds without abandoning either one. As she packed her bags for the return trip to Charlotte to finalize her relocation, Elena felt the profound satisfaction of someone who had finally stopped running from herself. The journey ahead would be challenging, requiring her to rebuild her life around authenticity rather than accommodation. But for the first time in years, she was excited rather than anxious about the future. The woman who had walked into the Cherokee Cultural Center a week ago as a lost soul in disguise was about to emerge as someone whole, integrated, and ready to contribute to her community while honoring all aspects of her complex identity. 6 months after Elena Nightfeather had walked into the Cherokee Cultural Center as a stranger to herself, she stood before the same tribal council that had first witnessed her professional expertise, presenting the final recommendations for the casino expansion project. But this time, she wasn't a visitor offering temporary assistance, she was home. The conference room buzzed with anticipation as Elena clicked through her presentation slides, each one representing weeks of analysis and community consultation. Her hair was longer now, often worn in a traditional braid adorned with beadwork her grandmother had made. She had traded her corporate suits for clothing that reflected both her professional role and her cultural identity, tailored blazers paired with traditional jewelry, modern cuts and fabrics that honored Cherokee aesthetics. After 6 months of comprehensive analysis, including environmental impact studies, community feedback sessions, and financial modeling, I'm recommending we proceed with a modified version of the casino expansion, Elena announced, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had found her authentic place in the world. The modification she proposed was revolutionary in its approach to Native American economic development. Instead of partnering with an outside hotel chain, Elena had identified opportunities to develop Cherokee-owned hospitality businesses that could capture tourism revenue while maintaining cultural integrity. Her plan included a cultural center that would educate visitors about Cherokee history, a traditional foods restaurant showcasing indigenous cuisine, and ecotourism ventures that would highlight the natural beauty of the Smoky Mountains, while providing sustainable employment for tribal members. The financial projections show that the Cherokee-owned model will generate 20% more long-term revenue than the original hotel partnership proposal. Elena continued, watching the council members lean forward with interest. More importantly, it keeps ownership and control within our community while creating opportunities for cultural preservation and education. Chief Redhawk smiled as Elena fielded questions from the council, her responses demonstrating the kind of bicultural competence that had become her signature strength. She could discuss profit margins and market analysis with the fluency of her corporate training, then seamlessly transition to conversations about cultural protocols and community values in Cherokee. After the presentation, the council voted unanimously to approve Elena's recommendations. As the meeting concluded, Dr. Jessica Swimmer approached Elena with an expression of professional respect that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. "I have a proposition for you," Jessica said. "The tribe is creating a new position, Director of Economic Development and Cultural Preservation. The role would involve overseeing projects like this casino expansion while ensuring that all our business ventures align with Cherokee values and benefit our community. Interested?" Elena felt her heart race with excitement and possibility. The position would represent everything she had been working toward, a way to use her professional skills in service of her heritage while building something meaningful for future generations of Cherokee people. "I'm very interested," Elena replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the magnitude of the opportunity. "The salary won't match what you could make in Charlotte," Jessica warned. "But the impact you could have on our community's future would be immeasurable." Elena thought about the corporate salary she had abandoned, the material comforts she had given up, the mainstream success she had walked away from. None of it compared to the satisfaction she felt when her work directly benefited her people, when her professional achievements strengthened rather than denied her cultural identity. "Money was never what was missing from my life," Elena said simply. That evening, Elena celebrated the council's approval at a community feast held in the cultural center where her journey of rediscovery had begun. The room was filled with Cherokee families, elderly tribal members who had known her grandmother, young people learning traditional crafts, and children chattering in Cherokee as they played between the tables. Rebecca Smoke found Elena during the celebration, carrying 2 plates loaded with traditional foods that Elena had learned to prepare during her months of cultural immersion. "Your grandmother would be so proud," Rebecca said, settling beside Elena at a table decorated with wildflowers and traditional pottery. "Not just because of your professional success, but because you found a way to honor both parts of your heritage." Elena looked around the room, seeing her community with eyes that appreciated both its ancient wisdom and its modern challenges. She had learned to see Cherokee culture not as a limitation to be overcome, but as a source of strength and insight that enhanced her ability to navigate contemporary complexities. "I never thought I could have both," Elena admitted. "I thought I had to choose between being Cherokee and being successful in the modern world." "That's what colonization teaches us," Rebecca replied thoughtfully. "That our traditional ways are incompatible with success, that we have to abandon our heritage to thrive. But you're proving that's not true. You're showing our young people that they can be fully Cherokee and fully successful in whatever field they choose." Elena's attention was drawn to a group of teenagers at a nearby table, including several from Rebecca's dance classes. They were discussing college applications and career plans, speaking easily in both Cherokee and English, clearly comfortable with their bicultural identities in ways that Elena had never been at their age. One of the young women, Sarah Ridge, approached Elena with the respectful confidence of someone raised to value both education and tradition. "Ms. Nightfeather, I wanted to thank you for the mentorship program you started," Sarah said. "Having someone who understands both Cherokee culture and business success has been amazing for those of us planning careers outside the reservation." Elena's mentorship program had been an unexpected outgrowth of her role as economic development consultant. Young Cherokee people had begun seeking her advice about navigating higher education and professional careers without abandoning their cultural identity. Elena found herself offering the guidance she wished she had received at their age: how to succeed in mainstream institutions while maintaining pride in Cherokee heritage. "What are your plans after graduation?" Elena asked Sarah. "I want to study environmental law," Sarah replied enthusiastically. "I want to help tribes protect their natural resources and fight climate change using both Western legal frameworks and indigenous knowledge systems." Elena felt a surge of pride and hope. Sarah represented the future she was helping to create: Cherokee young people who saw their heritage as an asset rather than an obstacle, who understood that indigenous perspectives were desperately needed in contemporary conversations about sustainability, justice, and community well-being. After the feast, Elena walked to her grandmother's house, which she had been slowly renovating and modernizing while preserving its essential character. The house now served as both her residence and her office, with one room converted to workspace where she could conduct business calls. While surrounded by her grandmother's photographs and traditional artwork, Elena found Thomas Crow Feather waiting on her front porch, rocking gently in the chair he had claimed as his own during his weekly visits. At 87, Thomas moved more slowly than he had 6 months earlier, but his mind remained sharp and his presence continued to anchor Elena to the spiritual dimensions of her journey. "The council made a good decision today," Thomas said, as Elena settled into the rocking chair beside him. "Your grandmother would say the circle has closed properly." "What do you mean?" Elena asked. Thomas was quiet for a moment, his weathered hands folded over the walking stick that had belonged to his grandfather. "Mary always said you were meant to be a bridge," he explained. "She saw that you had the gifts to succeed in the white world, but she also knew you carried the wisdom of our ancestors. She believed that someday you would find a way to use both sets of knowledge to help our people." Elena felt tears gathering as she considered the profound faith her grandmother had maintained even during Elena's years of absence and denial. She died before she could see any of this happen, Elena said softly. Who says she didn't see it? Thomas replied with a gentle smile. Your grandmother was a medicine woman. She could see farther into the future than most people can see into the past. She knew you would come home to yourself eventually. Thomas reached into his leather pouch and withdrew a small object wrapped in soft buckskin. Elena recognized the ceremonial presentation, understanding that she was about to receive something significant. This belonged to your great-grandmother. And to her grandmother before that, Thomas said, unwrapping a delicate silver bracelet adorned with turquoise and traditional Cherokee symbols. It's been passed down through the women of your family for 5 generations. Mary asked me to give it to you when you were ready to receive it. Elena held the bracelet up to the porch light, admiring the intricate craftsmanship and feeling the weight of generational legacy. The silver was worn smooth in places by decades of wearing, and the turquoise had developed the deep patina that comes with age and handling. How will I know if I'm worthy of wearing it? Elena asked. You already know, Thomas replied. You wouldn't be here if you weren't ready. Elena fastened the bracelet around her wrist, feeling the metal warm against her skin. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all these years. What happens now? Elena asked, looking out at the mountains that had reclaimed their place as her horizon. Now you live the life your ancestors dreamed for you, Thomas said simply. You honor the sacrifices they made while building something new for the generations that will follow. The next morning brought news that would test Elena's commitment to her new path. Janet Morrison called with an unexpected offer, a senior vice president position at a major consulting firm in Atlanta, working specifically on diversity and inclusion initiatives for Fortune 500 companies. The salary would be triple what you're making now, Janet explained. And the position would allow you to advocate for Native American interests at the highest levels of corporate America. You could have real influence on policies that affect indigenous communities nationwide. Elena felt a familiar flutter of temptation as Janet described the prestige and financial rewards of returning to the corporate world. The position would represent the pinnacle of mainstream professional success, the kind of achievement she had dreamed about during her years of hiding her heritage. I told them about your background, about your unique perspective as someone who understands both Cherokee culture and corporate strategy. They're specifically interested in your bicultural competence. Elena realized with irony that the heritage she had once hidden was now being marketed as her greatest professional asset. Companies were beginning to understand that indigenous perspectives were valuable for addressing contemporary challenges, that Native Americans who could navigate both traditional and modern systems possessed exactly the kind of cultural intelligence that global organizations needed. Can I have some time to think about it? Elena asked. Of course, but Elena, opportunities like this don't come along often. This could be your chance to make a real difference on a national scale. After ending the call, Elena sat on her grandmother's porch considering the crossroads that seemed to define her journey. She could return to the corporate world as a Cherokee woman rather than a hidden one, using her newfound authenticity as a platform for broader influence. Or she could continue building her life in Cherokee, working at a smaller scale but with deeper community roots. She thought about Sarah Ridge and the other young people whose educational and career aspirations were being shaped by Elena's example. She considered the casino project and the dozens of other economic development initiatives that would require her expertise over the coming years. She reflected on her grandmother's house, which was slowly becoming the center of informal community gatherings, where business discussions blended seamlessly with cultural education. Elena realized that the question wasn't whether she could have more impact in corporate America or in Cherokee. The question was where she could have the most authentic impact. where she could contribute to change while remaining true to the integration of identity she had worked so hard to achieve. Afternoon, Elena drove to the Cherokee Cultural Center where her journey of rediscovery had begun. She found Chief Redhawk in his office, reviewing grant applications for educational programs that would expand Cherokee language instruction in local schools. "I received an interesting job offer today," Elena said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Senior VP at a major consulting firm in Atlanta, focusing on corporate diversity initiatives. Chief Redhawk looked up from his papers, his expression thoughtful but unsurprised. "And you're wondering if you should take it?" "I'm wondering if staying here is the right choice, or if I'm just taking the easier path." "Easier?" Chief Redhawk laughed. "Elena, you've spent the last 6 months completely rebuilding your life, learning to integrate conflicting aspects of your identity, and taking on economic development challenges that would intimidate most people with twice your experience. Nothing about your path has been easy." Elena appreciated his perspective, but she still felt the pull of broader influence, the temptation of making a difference on a larger stage. "What if I could do more good working with corporations nationwide than working with one tribal community?" "Chief." Redhawk was quiet for a moment, considering her question with the gravity it deserved. "That's possible," he said finally. "But it's also possible that what we're building here will serve as a model for other tribal communities, that the economic development strategies you're creating will be replicated across Indian country. Sometimes the most profound influence starts small and spreads outward." Elena thought about the ripple effects of her work in Cherokee, the ways that successful indigenous-owned economic development could inspire similar initiatives in other Native communities. She considered the mentorship program that was already attracting attention from tribal educators across the Southeast, the cultural preservation components that were being studied by other indigenous communities worldwide. "Besides," Chief Redhawk continued with a slight smile, "who says this has to be a permanent choice? You're 35 years old, Elena. You have decades ahead of you to influence change in multiple arenas. Maybe the question isn't whether to choose Cherokee or corporate America, but how to build a career that allows you to contribute to both over time." Elena felt something settle in her chest, a sense of peace that came from recognizing that her journey didn't require definitive endpoints or permanent commitments. She could spend the next few years building something extraordinary in Cherokee, while remaining open to opportunities that might allow her to expand her influence later. That evening, Elena called Janet Morrison to decline the Atlanta position, but she did so with gratitude and the suggestion that they stay in touch about future opportunities. She wasn't closing doors. She was choosing to walk fully through the one that was currently open. As the sun set behind the Smoky Mountains, Elena sat in her grandmother's rocking chair wearing her great-grandmother's bracelet, reviewing proposals for Cherokee youth. Leadership programs that would prepare the next generation to navigate bicultural identities with confidence and pride. For the first time in her adult life, Elena felt completely aligned with herself and her work. She was Elena Nightfeather, Cherokee woman and economic development expert, bridge builder and tradition keeper, someone who had learned that authenticity didn't require choosing between different aspects of identity, but rather finding ways to integrate them all into something stronger and more beautiful than any single piece. The little girl who had grown up listening to her grandmother's stories about Cherokee resilience and adaptation had finally learned to embody those lessons, not by abandoning her heritage or her professional ambitions, but by finding ways to honor both while creating something entirely new. As night fell over the mountains that had shaped her ancestors' lives for thousands of years, Elena began planning the next phase of her work, economic development strategies that would ensure Cherokee culture not only survived, but thrived in the modern world, creating prosperity that enhanced rather than diminished the community's connection to its heritage. The woman who had once hidden her Cherokee blood had become someone who celebrated it as her greatest source of strength, wisdom, and purpose. The circle her grandmother had dreamed of was finally complete. 2 years had passed since Elena Nightfeather officially became the Director of Economic Development and Cultural Preservation for the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. What had begun as a personal journey of identity reclamation had evolved into something far more significant, a new model for indigenous economic development that was attracting attention from tribal communities across North America. Elena stood in the grand ballroom of the newly opened Cherokee Heritage Resort, watching delegates from 37 different tribes network during the first annual Indigenous Economic Summit. The resort itself was a testament to her vision, a luxury destination that showcased Cherokee architecture, employed tribal members in leadership positions, and generated revenue that funded language preservation programs and traditional arts. Education. Quite a transformation from the woman who walked into the cultural center 3 years ago, Chief Red Hawk observed, joining Elena near the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the Smoky Mountains. Elena smiled, adjusting the traditional Cherokee tear dress she wore for formal occasions. The garment was one of many pieces she had commissioned from tribal artists, part of her commitment to supporting Cherokee craftspeople while presenting their culture with dignity and sophistication to the outside world. Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, Elena admitted, watching Lakota economic planners discuss sustainable tourism strategies with Ojibwe entrepreneurs. When I was hiding my identity in Charlotte, I never imagined Cherokee expertise could be valued on this scale. The summit had drawn participants from as far away as Alaska and New Mexico, all eager to learn about the Cherokee approach to balancing economic development with cultural preservation. Elena's model, which prioritized indigenous ownership, cultural authenticity, and community benefit over maximum profit, was being studied by Harvard Business School and featured in Economic Development Journals Worldwide. Dr. Robert Bergreis, an Anishinaabe economist from Minnesota, approached Elena with an expression of professional admiration that would have seemed impossible during her corporate days. Elena, I wanted to personally thank you for agreeing to consult on our casino renovation project, he said. The preliminary designs your team developed are exactly what we needed, economically viable but culturally grounded. Elena's consulting practice had expanded beyond Cherokee to serve tribal communities across the continent. She had assembled a team of indigenous professionals who shared her commitment to development strategies that strengthened rather than compromised tribal identity. How's the community response been? Elena asked. Overwhelmingly positive. The elders are particularly pleased that the design incorporates traditional Anishinaabe symbols and creates spaces for cultural programming. Your approach proves that we don't have to choose between prosperity and authenticity. After Dr. Bergreis moved on to other conversations, Elena found herself approached by a young woman she didn't immediately recognize. The stranger was perhaps 25, with features that suggested mixed heritage and an air of professional confidence tempered by nervous uncertainty. Miss Nightfeather? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm Jessica Mankiller from the University of Oklahoma. I'm working on my doctorate in Native American Studies, focusing on contemporary identity formation among urban indigenous people. Elena felt a familiar recognition in Jessica's manner, the subtle signs of someone navigating multiple cultural worlds while searching for authentic identity. What's your research focus specifically? Elena asked, guiding Jessica toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. I'm studying Native Americans who grew up disconnected from their tribal communities and later reconnected as adults. Your story has been mentioned by several of my interview subjects as inspiration for their own journeys. Elena realized with surprise that her personal transformation had become a case study in indigenous identity reclamation, that her journey from denial to integration was helping other Native people navigate similar challenges. What have you discovered in your research? Elena asked. Jessica's eyes lit up with academic enthusiasm. That identity reclamation is rarely a simple return to traditional ways. Most successful reintegration involves creating new forms of indigenous identity that honor ancestral culture while addressing contemporary realities. Your economic development work is a perfect example. It's distinctly Cherokee, but also thoroughly modern. Elena felt a complex mixture of pride and responsibility. She had never set out to become a role model or case study, but she understood that visibility brought obligations to the broader indigenous community. Are you connected to your own tribal community? Elena asked gently. Jessica's confident facade wavered slightly. That's complicated. My great-grandmother was Cherokee, but my family moved to cities generations ago. I grew up knowing I was Native, but not really knowing what that meant practically. I'm trying to figure out how to connect authentically without appropriating experiences I didn't grow up with. Elena recognized Jessica's dilemma immediately. It was a variation of her own story, complicated by additional generations of disconnection and the challenge of claiming indigenous identity without the foundation of childhood cultural education. Have you spent time in Cherokee? Elena asked. Not yet. I've been afraid that I wouldn't be accepted, that my Cherokee heritage is too diluted or too distant to matter. Elena thought of her own fears about returning to Cherokee, her conviction that she had forfeited her right to claim her heritage. Through years of denial, she remembered the grace with which the community had welcomed her back, the understanding that identity was more complex than simple presence or absence. Why don't you stay after the summit? Elena suggested. I'd be happy to introduce you to some community members, help you explore your Cherokee connections without pressure or expectations. Jessica's relief was visible. I would be so grateful. I've been working on this research for 2 years, but I feel like I can't fully understand the subject until I understand it personally. That evening, Elena hosted a private dinner for summit delegates at her grandmother's house, which had become a gathering place for indigenous leaders visiting Cherokee. The dining room table that had once seated Elena's nuclear family now accommodated 12 people representing 8 different tribes, their conversations weaving between English and various indigenous languages as they shared stories and strategies. Thomas Crow Feather, now nearing 90 but still sharp-minded, held court from the head of the table, regaling the younger attendees with stories about indigenous economic development efforts from decades past. Your generation thinks you invented indigenous entrepreneurship, he said with a mischievous grin, but we've been adapting our traditional ways to new economies for centuries. The difference is that now you have the education and connections to do it on a scale we could only dream about. Elena watched the interplay between generations with deep satisfaction. Thomas and the other elders provided historical context and cultural grounding, while Elena's generation brought professional expertise and institutional access. The younger attendees, like Jessica Mankiller, represented the future indigenous people, who would grow up assuming they could be both culturally grounded and globally successful. Dr. Maria Santos, a Pueblo architect from New Mexico, raised her wine glass in a toast to Elena Knight Feather, who proved that coming home to yourself can benefit entire communities. Elena felt overwhelmed by the recognition, but also by the weight of expectations it represented. She had become a symbol of successful indigenous identity integration, but symbols carried responsibilities that could be as burdensome as they were honoring. After the guests departed, Elena found herself alone with Jessica Mankiller, who had accepted the invitation to stay in Cherokee for a few additional days. They sat on the front porch where Elena had received so many important lessons from Grace Sequoia and Thomas Crow Feather, watching fireflies dance in the mountain twilight. Can I ask you something personal? Jessica said hesitantly. Of course. Do you ever regret the years you spent hiding your Cherokee identity? Do you wish you had never left? Elena considered the question carefully, recognizing its complexity and importance, not just for Jessica, but for her own ongoing process of self-understanding. "I regret the pain I caused myself and others through denial," Elena said finally. "I regret missing time with my grandmother, losing years when I could have been learning from her. But I don't regret the journey itself, because it taught me things I couldn't have learned any other way." "What kind of things?" "How to succeed in mainstream institutions. How to navigate systems that weren't designed for people like us. How to communicate Cherokee values to non-Cherokee people. How to build bridges between worlds that often seem incompatible." Elena paused, watching a hawk circle lazily over the valley below. "If I had never left Cherokee, I would be a different person with different skills. I might be more culturally grounded, but I wouldn't have the professional experience that allows me to help our community engage with the modern economy on our own terms." Jessica nodded thoughtfully. "So you see your time away as preparation for what you're doing now." "I see my entire journey, including the painful parts, as necessary for becoming someone who could do this work effectively. The corporate experience wasn't separate from my Cherokee identity. It was part of preparing me to serve my community in ways that earlier generations couldn't." The next morning, Elena took Jessica to visit the Cherokee Language Immersion School, where children learned academic subjects entirely in Cherokee. They observed 5-year-olds discussing mathematics concepts in their ancestral language, their fluency representing a linguistic revival that had seemed impossible just a generation earlier. "How do you maintain Cherokee identity while also preparing children for success in the broader world?" Jessica asked the school's principal, Dr. Anna Kingbird. Dr. Kingbird, the same woman who had welcomed Elena back to Cherokee language circles 3 years earlier, smiled at the familiar question. "We teach them that Cherokee identity makes them stronger in any environment," she explained. "Our language contains concepts about community responsibility, environmental stewardship, and holistic thinking that are increasingly valuable in the modern world. These children will be bicultural leaders, able to contribute to Cherokee communities and mainstream institutions with equal effectiveness." Elena watched Jessica observe the classroom dynamics, seeing the young scholar recognize possibilities for indigenous identity that transcended the either-or thinking that had trapped Elena for so many years. That afternoon, they visited Elena's various economic development projects: the Heritage Resort, the Traditional Foods Restaurant, the Artisan Cooperative that connected Cherokee craftspeople with national markets. Each venture demonstrated different aspects of Elena's integrated approach to prosperity and cultural preservation. At the Artisan Cooperative, Jessica met David Sequoia, Grace's grandson, who had returned to Cherokee after completing his MBA to develop sustainable markets for traditional Cherokee pottery and basketry. "My grandmother used to worry that traditional arts would die out because they couldn't provide livable incomes," David explained as he showed them pottery pieces that sold for hundreds of dollars to collectors worldwide. Elena's marketing strategies helped us position Cherokee crafts as luxury goods that honor our heritage while supporting our families. Jessica seemed amazed by the sophistication of the operation, the way traditional Cherokee aesthetics had been preserved and enhanced rather than compromised by commercial success. "This isn't what I expected indigenous economic development to look like," Jessica admitted to Elena as they drove back toward town. "What did you expect? Something more conflicted, I guess. More torn between traditional and modern. This feels integrated in ways I didn't think were possible." Elena understood Jessica's surprise. She had spent years believing that Cherokee identity and contemporary success were mutually exclusive, that authenticity required choosing sides. Learning to integrate rather than compartmentalize had been the most challenging and rewarding aspect of her journey. That evening, Elena arranged for Jessica to attend a community feast where she could meet Cherokee families in an informal setting. Jessica's nervousness was evident as they entered the cultural center, her anxiety about being accepted as authentically Cherokee despite her urban upbringing and limited cultural knowledge. Elena introduced Jessica to various community members, watching the young woman gradually relax as she discovered that Cherokee identity was more expansive and welcoming than she had feared. Her great-grandmother's maiden name was recognized by several elders, who shared stories about the family line and helped Jessica understand her place in the broader Cherokee genealogy. "Your great-grandmother was Mary Big Meat's cousin," explained George Ridge, a tribal historian. "She moved to Tulsa during the Depression, but she stayed connected to the community through letters and visits. We always wondered what happened to her descendants." Jessica's eyes filled with tears as she realized her family's Cherokee connections had never been completely severed, that her heritage was recognized and valued by the community despite decades of geographic separation. "You carry Cherokee blood and Cherokee spirit," George continued kindly. "The distance doesn't change that. The question is what you want to do with that inheritance." Elena watched Jessica's transformation throughout the evening, seeing her shift from an anxious outsider to someone beginning to understand her authentic place in the Cherokee community. The process reminded Elena of her own journey, but Jessica's path was different, less about reclaiming rejected identity than about claiming identity that had always existed but never been fully explored. As the feast concluded, Rebecca Smoke approached Elena with news that would reshape her understanding of her own impact. "I wanted you to know that we've received funding requests from 15 different tribal communities who want to replicate your economic development model," Rebecca said. "The Bureau of Indian Affairs is asking if you'd be willing to lead a national initiative to share your strategies across Indian country." Elena felt the familiar flutter of expanded opportunity, but this time it came without the anxiety that had accompanied earlier crossroads decisions. She had learned to evaluate opportunities based on alignment with her values rather than external validation or financial rewards. "What would that involve?" Elena asked. "Training programs for tribal economic development officers, consulting support for communities developing their own heritage-based businesses, policy recommendations for federal agencies working with tribes. Essentially, you'd be scaling your Cherokee work to benefit indigenous communities nationwide." Elena looked around the cultural center where her journey had begun, seeing Cherokee families whose economic prospects had been transformed by the initiatives she had helped develop. She thought about Jessica Mankiller and the countless other urban indigenous people who were searching for ways to connect authentically with their heritage. She considered the delegates from 37 tribes who had come to Cherokee to learn strategies they could adapt for their own communities. "I'd need to maintain my base here in Cherokee," Elena said finally. "This community is my foundation, and I won't sacrifice that for broader influence. Of course, the position would be designed around your Cherokee commitments, not in spite of them." Elena realized that the choice before her represented the culmination of her journey from hiding her Cherokee identity to celebrating it as her greatest professional asset. She had the opportunity to influence indigenous economic development on a continental scale while remaining rooted in the community that had shaped her values and vision. "Let me discuss it with Chief Redhawk and the council," Elena said. "If they support the idea, and if we can structure it properly, I'm interested." As Elena drove Jessica back to Grace's bed and breakfast, both women were quiet, processing the events and revelations of the day. Elena understood that she was witnessing Jessica's first steps on a journey of identity integration that would be challenging, but ultimately transformative. "Thank you for today," Jessica said as they arrived at the bed and breakfast. "I feel like I understand something about myself that I've been searching for my entire adult life." "What's that?" "That being Cherokee doesn't require me to abandon everything else I am. That I can be a scholar and a Cherokee woman. That I can live in cities and maintain tribal connections. That I can build a modern life while honoring ancestral wisdom." Elena smiled, recognizing the breakthrough that had eluded her for so many years. Jessica was learning at 25 what Elena had only discovered at 35. That indigenous identity was expansive enough to contain multiple ways of being. That authenticity was about integration rather than limitation. "What will you do when you finish your dissertation?" Elena asked. "I'm thinking about law school. Maybe environmental law, focusing on tribal sovereignty and natural resource protection. I want to use my education to benefit indigenous communities. But I also want to maintain my academic career." Elena heard echoes of her own journey in Jessica's aspirations. The desire to use mainstream credentials in service of indigenous interests while maintaining personal authenticity. "That sounds perfect," Elena said. "And Jessica?" "Stay connected to Cherokee. Come back regularly, maintain relationships, contribute what you can. Your heritage isn't a burden to carry or a box to check. It's a source of strength and wisdom that will make you more effective in whatever field you choose." As Elena drove home through the mountain darkness, she reflected on the unexpected ways her personal journey had become a catalyst for broader change. She had returned to Cherokee seeking only to heal her own fractured identity, but her integration had created ripple effects that were now influencing indigenous communities across the continent. The woman who had once hidden her Cherokee blood was becoming someone whose Cherokee identity enabled her to serve indigenous people on a scale she had never imagined possible. The circle was expanding far beyond her grandmother's dreams, creating new possibilities for future generations of indigenous people who would grow up assuming they could be both culturally grounded and globally successful. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but Elena felt ready for whatever came next. She had learned to trust her integration of Cherokee wisdom and contemporary skills, to see her complex identity as a source of strength rather than confusion. The journey that had begun with shame and denial had become a foundation for service and leadership that honored both her ancestors and her community's future. 5 years after, Elena Nightfeather had first walked into the Cherokee Cultural Center as a lost soul in disguise. She stood before the United Nations Indigenous Forum in New York City, delivering the keynote address on indigenous economic sovereignty. The transformation was complete, yet the journey continued. Economic development without cultural preservation is just colonization by another name, Elena declared to the international audience of indigenous leaders, government officials, and development specialists. But when we lead with our values and our wisdom, we create prosperity that strengthens rather than compromises our identities. In the audience sat Jessica Mankiller, now Dr. Jessica Mankiller, having completed her law degree and recently been appointed as the first Native American environmental justice attorney for the state of Oklahoma. Beside her sat 3 other young indigenous professionals who had participated in Elena's national mentorship network, their careers spanning everything from renewable energy development to traditional food systems restoration. Elena's presentation showcased the Cherokee model as it had become known internationally through data that told a story of transformation. Cherokee unemployment had dropped from 32% to 8% over 5 years. Traditional language fluency among tribal youth had increased by 150%. Most significantly, 89% of Cherokee college graduates were now returning to the reservation after completing their education, reversing decades of brain drain. The secret isn't choosing between tradition and modernity, Elena continued, clicking a slide showing Cherokee youth working on sustainable technology projects while speaking their ancestral language. The secret is understanding that indigenous knowledge systems contain solutions to contemporary challenges that the modern world desperately needs. After her presentation, Elena was approached by Dr. Sarah Runningbear, director of the Harvard Indigenous Leadership Initiative, with an invitation that would have seemed impossible during Elena's corporate years. "We'd like to offer you a joint appointment," Dr. Runningbear explained. Half-time teaching at Harvard Business School, half-time continuing your work in Cherokee. You'd be developing a curriculum around indigenous approaches to sustainable business practices while maintaining your community base. Elena felt the familiar recognition of expanded opportunity, but this time the decision process was different. Instead of anxiety about choosing between competing identities, she felt calm confidence in her ability to evaluate the offer based on its alignment with her integrated vision of success. "I'd need guarantees about intellectual property rights for Cherokee knowledge systems," Elena said immediately. "And any curriculum development would need to include Cherokee community members as co-creators, not just subjects of study." Dr. Running Bear smiled with approval. "That's exactly the kind of approach we're hoping you'll bring to Harvard. We want to learn from indigenous communities, not extract knowledge from them." Elena realized that her journey had reached another turning point, but this time she wasn't being asked to choose between Cherokee identity and mainstream success. She was being invited to teach the integrated approach she had developed, to help create a new generation of leaders who understood that indigenous wisdom enhanced rather than limited contemporary effectiveness. That evening, Elena called Chief Red Hawk from her hotel room overlooking Central Park, seeking the counsel that had guided her through previous major decisions. "The Harvard position would give you a platform to influence thousands of future business leaders," Chief Red Hawk observed after Elena explained the opportunity. "But more importantly, it would position Cherokee knowledge systems as essential to contemporary education rather than historical curiosities." "Are you saying I should accept?" "I'm saying you should trust the integration you've achieved. You're no longer choosing between Cherokee identity and professional opportunity. You're choosing how to best use your integrated identity to serve both Cherokee interests and broader indigenous advancement." Elena understood the distinction. The woman who had once hidden her Cherokee heritage to access mainstream opportunities was now being courted by elite institutions, specifically because of her Cherokee expertise and perspective. 2 weeks later, Elena stood before the Cherokee Tribal Council to request their blessing for the Harvard appointment. The council chamber where she had first presented her casino analysis was now familiar territory. But the significance of this moment felt even greater than her initial homecoming. "This opportunity exists because of the work we've built together," Elena told the council members. "The Cherokee model that Harvard wants to teach was created by this community, through our collective commitment to integration rather than assimilation. Any success I have in that role belongs to all of us." Chief Red Hawk, now preparing for retirement after decades of leadership, spoke with the gravity of someone passing wisdom to the next generation. "Elena represents what our ancestors dreamed of when they survived removal, when they preserved our language in secret, when they maintained our traditions despite centuries of pressure to abandon them. She proves that Cherokee identity doesn't limit our children's possibilities, it expands them." The council voted unanimously to support Elena's Harvard appointment, with the understanding that she would maintain her Cherokee residence and continue her economic development work on a part-time basis. 6 months later, Elena delivered her first lecture to Harvard Business School students in a traditional Cherokee teardress, her great-great-grandmother's silver bracelet gleaming as she gestured towards slides showing Cherokee-owned enterprises that had achieved both financial success and cultural authenticity. Business ethics isn't an abstract concept in Cherokee culture, Elena explained to the lecture hall filled with future corporate leaders. Our traditional teachings about seven-generation thinking require us to consider the impact of our decisions on descendants who won't be born for another 140 years. Imagine how that perspective would change contemporary business practices. Among her students was Marcus Wellington, Jr., the nephew of her former boyfriend Marcus, who had enrolled in her course out of curiosity about the Cherokee woman his uncle still occasionally mentioned with confused regret. Elena had no idea of the connection, But she noticed the young man's unusual engagement with indigenous perspectives on leadership and sustainability. After class, Marcus Jr. approached Alina with questions that revealed both genuine interest and family familiarity. "Professor Nightfeather, my uncle used to date a woman who I think might have been Cherokee, though she never talked about it. He said she was brilliant but seemed conflicted about her background. Your lectures make me wonder if she was dealing with the kind of identity challenges you describe." Elena felt a flash of recognition but kept her expression neutral. Identity integration is challenging for many indigenous people, especially those who grow up disconnected from their communities. "What's your interest in indigenous business practices?" "I'm starting to understand that indigenous knowledge systems offer solutions to problems that conventional business education doesn't address. Sustainability, community responsibility, long-term thinking, these aren't just nice ideas. They're survival strategies that have worked for thousands of years." Alina smiled, recognizing the emergence of understanding that transcended personal history. Marcus Jr. was learning to value indigenous perspectives, not because of family connections or guilt about historical injustices, but because he recognized their practical value for contemporary challenges. That spring, Elena received news that completed the circle of her transformation in ways she had never anticipated. Jessica Mankiller called with an announcement that filled Elena with pride and hope for the future. "I wanted you to know that I'm pregnant," Jessica said, her voice radiant with joy. "And I wanted to ask if you'd consider being the baby's Cherokee cultural mentor. You helped me find my way back to our heritage, and I want my child to grow up with Cherokee identity as a source of strength rather than confusion." Elena felt tears gathering as she considered the profound honor Jessica was offering. The journey that had begun with Elena's painful separation from Cherokee culture was now creating opportunities for the next generation to embrace their heritage with confidence and pride. "I would be deeply honored," Elena replied. "And Jessica, your child will grow up in a world where Cherokee identity is recognized as valuable and powerful. They'll never have to choose between being Cherokee and being successful in any field. They choose." As Elena prepared for the summer break that would allow her to spend extended time in Cherokee, she reflected on the impossible distance she had traveled from the scared, conflicted woman who had walked into the cultural center 5 years earlier. That woman had believed she had to choose between Cherokee identity and contemporary success. This woman understood that Cherokee identity was the foundation of her contemporary success. The final confirmation of her transformation came during Cherokee National Holiday, when Elena was invited to speak at the opening ceremony about the importance of cultural preservation for economic development. Standing before thousands of Cherokee people, wearing traditional regalia that had been gifted to her by community elders, Elena felt the profound satisfaction of someone who had found her authentic place in the world. Our ancestors survived removal, assimilation policies, and cultural suppression because they understood something that the modern world is just beginning to recognize, Elena told the gathering. Cherokee knowledge, Cherokee values, and Cherokee ways of thinking are not obstacles to success in the contemporary world. They are essential tools for creating the kind of future our children deserve. In the audience, she spotted Thomas Crow Feather, now 92 and using a wheelchair but still sharp-eyed and proud. Beside him sat Grace Sequoia, beaming with the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed a wayward granddaughter find her way home. Near the front, Jessica Mankiller placed protective hands over her growing belly, already planning the Cherokee childhood her child would experience. As Elena concluded her speech, she realized that her grandmother's circle of influence had expanded far beyond what Mary Nightfeather could have imagined. The medicine bundle that had called Elena home was now inspiring indigenous people across the continent to embrace the integration of traditional wisdom and contemporary opportunity. The woman who had once hidden her mixed blood had become someone who celebrated it as the source of her greatest contributions to the world. The scared girl who had fled Cherokee had become a leader who understood that home wasn't a place you returned to unchanged, but a foundation you carried with you as you worked to change the world. Elena Nightfeather had finally learned the most important lesson of all. Authenticity wasn't about choosing between different parts of yourself, but about integrating them all into something stronger, more beautiful, and more powerful than any single piece. The circle was complete, but the story continued, rippling outward through generations of indigenous people who would grow up knowing they could be both culturally grounded and globally successful. Her grandmother's wisdom had been proven true. Cherokee blood calls to Cherokee blood, even across great distances and long silences. And when that call is finally answered with courage and authenticity, it creates possibilities that no one could have imagined. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.